when life has broken you. In a small town nestled among towering mountains, there lived a man who appeared to have it all. On the outside, his life was the dream: family, career, the perfect house. Everyone who looked at him saw success. But behind the polished exterior, something was quietly falling apart. It wasn't his job that made him feel empty. It wasn't the house that left him hollow. It was the silence, the kind that crept in when the world went quiet and he found himself alone, staring into the dark, wondering where it all went wrong. One evening, as he sat at his desk, staring at an email from yet another company that wanted to thank him for his years of service, the truth hit him with the force of 1,000 bricks. A realization so deep and painful, it almost broke him. It wasn't a failure or a loss that had shattered him. It was the fact that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to live for himself. The harsh truth no one ever warns you about is that when you stop living for yourself, life has a way of dismantling you, piece by piece, until you're just a shell of the person you used to be. What happens when life has broken you in ways you never expected? How do you rebuild when the pieces seem impossible to find? His name was William. He was the kind of man who kept his thoughts to himself, never one for attention or drama. To the outside world, his life was the epitome of success, but deep down, he always felt like something was slipping through his fingers, something he couldn't quite grasp. It all started when he was a boy, watching his father pour every ounce of himself into a job that drained him, only to be left with nothing when the company collapsed. His mother, a woman of few words but endless strength, had always told him, "Success is not measured by what you own, but by who you are." William had believed her then, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that truth. He worked tirelessly, gave everything to his family, and climbed the corporate ladder until he was the one in charge, the one making decisions. But it wasn't the work that drove him. It was the validation, the constant need to prove himself. He thought that if he could just achieve enough, he would finally feel complete. Feel what? He didn't even know anymore. Life, however, doesn't wait for answers. It moves relentlessly forward, like a river that carves its way through the landscape, slow and unyielding. One evening, after another grueling day of meetings and emails, William came home to the sound of his children's laughter. Jane, his wife, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The warmth in the air should have felt comforting, but instead, it felt like a distant echo of something he had once known. Sitting at the table, the familiar hum of his home felt foreign. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to look down, too afraid to see the fall. But what was he afraid of? What had he lost? What was slipping away without him even realizing? His phone buzzed, another notification, another email, another task demanding his attention. And there it was again, the suffocating weight of responsibility, the never-ending list of things expected of him, each one piling higher, squeezing the air from his lungs. He smiled, nodded, and engaged with Jane, but inside it felt like he was disappearing. The man who had built this life, this image of success, was vanishing. He had stopped dreaming. He had stopped living for himself. Weeks passed and the cracks in his world grew wider. The emails became a flood, the meetings endless. But it wasn't the work itself that was breaking him. It was the realization that he had become a pawn in a game he no longer understood. He was playing a role, following a script, but at what cost? He was part of a system, one that demanded more and more of him, without ever asking if he was still in it for the right reasons. The truth was, he had lost himself somewhere along the way. And now, the man who had once believed in something bigger than himself was standing on the edge, uncertain of how to move forward. One night, after yet another grueling late shift at the office, William stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at the man who looked back at him. He studied the reflection carefully, the sharp jawline, the neatly combed hair, the suit that fit just right. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. He had the look of success, the kind that others would envy. But inside he felt nothing but emptiness. He could see it all, the face of the man he had become, but it didn't feel like him. He didn't recognize the person in the mirror. This wasn't the man who once had big dreams, who believed that his life would be more than a paycheck and a neatly organized schedule. This man was a stranger to himself, a person who had spent so much time chasing external markers of success that he had forgotten to ask the one question that mattered most. Who am I really? He thought about his father, about how he had sacrificed everything in pursuit of a dream that ultimately slipped through his fingers. His father had worked tirelessly, believing that the right job, the right house, the right car would bring fulfillment. He had lived for those things. And when they all crumbled, when his job vanished, his home was sold, and his status was reduced to nothing, there was no meaning left. His father had spent his entire life building something that didn't last, never realizing that success wasn't a destination. It was a fragile illusion. For so long, William had followed in his father's footsteps, pursuing the same dream, repeating the same cycle, not realizing that he too was chasing something that didn't truly matter. And now, as he stared at himself in the mirror, it was all so clear. Success had become a game he no longer wanted to play. The next day, when he walked into the office, the hum of fluorescent lights above him seemed deafening, echoing through his head with every step he took. The mountain of emails stacked on his desk felt heavier than ever, each one another reminder that he was tethered to a life he didn't want. The tasks continued to multiply, projects, deadlines, meetings, but it all felt meaningless. Hollow. The weight of the realization sank in deep. I've been living for everyone else, he thought. In the process, I've lost myself. For the first time in years, he felt a deep, aching loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone, and everything to do with being surrounded by things that no longer had meaning. His colleagues, who had once seemed so important, now felt like mere faces passing by. Their conversations, their small talk, the tasks they collaborated on, none of it mattered. And Jane, his wife, the woman he had once shared his dreams with, she had become a stranger. They had drifted apart in ways they hadn't even noticed, living parallel lives under the same roof, but worlds apart. They both wore smiles that didn't reach their eyes, pretending everything was fine when nothing was. Then came the phone call. Jane asked him to meet her for dinner. Nothing fancy, just something casual, something they hadn't done in months. William agreed, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. When he met her at the small restaurant, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed in a long time. It was the look of someone who knew, someone who had seen past the mask he had worn for so long. "How long?" she asked, her voice soft, yet cutting through the noise of the bustling restaurant like a blade. "Long enough," William replied, his voice barely above a whisper, his gaze fixed on the empty glass in front of him. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. For the first time, he couldn't lie to her. He couldn't pretend that everything was okay when everything had been falling apart for so long. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, William couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the man he once was. The world outside continued to spin, full of noise and motion, but inside, he was still. He felt broken, like a shattered mirror with no way to piece himself back together. But then, something changed. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't some grand epiphany that hit him in a single moment. It was quieter than that. It was in the silence that followed the questions he hadn't wanted to answer. It was in the stillness of the night as he stared into the dark, wondering what had gone wrong. And then, in the deepest part of him, a small flicker of peace emerged. It wasn't peace that came from acceptance, but peace that came from a strange realization. What if he had the power to change? What if life wasn't about the job or the house or the approval? It was about the choices he made, about living for himself, about finding the man he used to be and giving him a second chance. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope stir inside of him. It was fragile, but it was there, and it was enough. The next morning, William didn't go to work. He didn't check his emails. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where he had once sat, buried under the weight of 1,000 obligations. But today, as he looked at it, he saw it for what it truly was. A moment, a breath, a chance to begin again. And in that moment, he made a choice. He chose to live for himself. He chose to stop chasing the approval of others. He chose to rebuild himself, piece by piece, and find the life he had lost along the way. What happens when life has broken you, when you've given everything to others and forgotten who you are? The answer isn't in the things you've lost. It's in the pieces you have left, the ones you've overlooked, the ones you've neglected. What do you do when everything you've built has shattered? How do you find yourself again when it feels like there's nothing left? It starts with the smallest choice, the choice to live for yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's when you'll begin to realize that the broken pieces are the ones that can make you whole again. If you've ever felt like life was slowly tearing you apart, leave a comment below with the words, "I choose myself," as a testament to your own path to healing. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. They're not alone in their struggle. Every broken moment holds a lesson, and sometimes it's the pieces that shape us the most. Want to see what comes next in this journey? Hit subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter.